A single handwritten note lay on the church altar in the bright morning sunlight, and by the time the final hymn ended, two hearts had already been broken by a prayer neither of them expected to be answered. They loved each other with every honest piece of their souls, yet every door they tried to walk through together closed in ways no one could explain. Friends whispered that love should always be enough, but sometimes the deepest pain comes when everything in your heart says yes while every quiet answer from heaven seems to say no. It was the kind of heartbreak that left everyone questioning whether faith could survive disappointment. If you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to our channel to become part of our growing community that believes every difficult ending can become the beginning of something beautiful. Clara Whitmore had always believed that love was one of God's greatest gifts. She had grown up in a peaceful town where every morning seemed to begin with sunlight spilling across old brick sidewalks, where neighbors greeted each other by name, and where faith was woven into ordinary life rather than displayed for attention. She possessed a quiet strength that made people feel safe around her. She volunteered at community food drives, cared for elderly neighbors without expecting recognition, and believed that every act of kindness mattered, even when no one noticed. She dreamed of becoming a family counselor because she wanted broken people to discover hope again. Life had taught her that pain often hid behind smiling faces, and she wanted to be the person who reminded others they were never truly alone. Across town lived Julian Mercer, a thoughtful architect whose greatest talent was designing buildings that felt warm rather than impressive. He believed homes should tell stories instead of showing wealth. He had experienced enough loss to understand that expensive walls could never replace genuine love. Years earlier, his father had passed away after a long illness, leaving Julian responsible for helping his mother rebuild her life emotionally. That experience deepened his faith and matured his character. Friends admired his honesty, patience, and quiet generosity. He never sought attention, yet people naturally trusted him because he listened more than he spoke. Their paths crossed during a daytime charity renovation project for an elderly widow whose house had become unsafe. Clara organized volunteers while Julian supervised repairs. They spent hours carrying supplies, laughing over simple mistakes, and discovering that they shared the same values. Neither of them noticed exactly when admiration quietly transformed into affection. Weeks turned into months filled with afternoon walks through parks, conversations over coffee after volunteering, and countless moments where they encouraged one another to trust God even when life became confusing. Their relationship grew slowly, rooted not in excitement alone but in respect, friendship, and shared purpose. Everyone around them assumed marriage would naturally follow. Their families welcomed the relationship, friends celebrated them, and even strangers often remarked that they seemed perfectly matched. Clara found herself imagining a future filled with laughter, children, and a home where compassion would always be more important than success. Julian carried a small ring in his pocket for several weeks, waiting for what he believed would be the perfect moment. Everything appeared beautifully aligned. Yet strange obstacles began appearing one after another. Every important decision somehow unraveled. Opportunities to settle in the same city unexpectedly disappeared. Clara received an offer to join a counseling internship she had prayed for, but it required a commitment that conflicted with Julian's own career opportunity. When they sacrificed one opportunity for the other, that second opportunity vanished as well. Plans that seemed certain dissolved within days. Each disappointment arrived during broad daylight, leaving them sitting together on park benches or church steps asking questions neither of them could answer. Instead of growing bitter toward one another, they prayed harder. The more sincerely they sought direction, however, the heavier their hearts became. Clara began noticing an uncomfortable peace whenever she prayed about surrendering her relationship, while anxiety filled her whenever she prayed specifically for marriage. She desperately wished those feelings would disappear. She convinced herself she was simply exhausted. Julian experienced similar confusion. Every logical reason supported their relationship, but his deepest moments of prayer always ended with an unsettling impression that waiting mattered more than moving forward. Neither wanted to admit it. They feared hurting the other person. Eventually they gathered enough courage to share their struggles. The conversation happened beneath bright afternoon skies outside a quiet chapel surrounded by blooming flowers. Tears filled Clara's eyes as she admitted she loved Julian deeply but no longer wanted to confuse her own desires with God's direction. Julian silently lowered his head because those words echoed exactly what had weighed on his own heart for weeks. Neither questioned the sincerity of the other's love. Neither accused the other of giving up. Their greatest pain came from realizing they both wanted the same future while believing heaven might be asking them to release it. Friends reacted differently. Some encouraged them to ignore those feelings and fight harder. Others insisted they were simply overthinking ordinary challenges. Several people criticized them for making faith unnecessarily complicated. The opinions only increased their confusion because everyone sounded confident while Clara and Julian themselves felt completely uncertain. Clara wrestled with guilt every day. She wondered if she lacked enough faith. She wondered whether fear had disguised itself as wisdom. Every afternoon she continued serving families at the counseling center, smiling warmly while privately carrying grief that few people recognized. She listened to couples repairing broken marriages, parents rebuilding trust with children, and individuals overcoming addiction. Ironically, while helping others find hope, she questioned why her own heart felt so heavy. Julian buried himself in work, designing affordable housing projects intended to restore dignity to struggling families. His co-workers noticed he had become quieter. He still smiled, still encouraged everyone around him, but moments of silence often revealed the sadness behind his eyes. He refused to blame Clara because he knew her sincerity. Instead, he asked himself difficult questions about identity. Had he unknowingly placed his future happiness entirely upon one relationship instead of trusting God regardless of the outcome? Months passed. Neither rushed into another relationship. Neither attempted to erase shared memories. Instead, they slowly learned how grief and gratitude could exist together. One bright morning Clara visited an elderly woman she had counseled through the loss of her husband. The widow gently explained that some prayers are answered by receiving exactly what we ask, while others are answered by changing who we become through waiting. Those words settled deeply inside Clara's heart. She realized that although she still loved Julian, her greatest prayer had quietly shifted. She no longer prayed for one specific outcome. She prayed for the strength to trust God's goodness whether or not her dreams unfolded as expected. Julian experienced his own turning point while presenting plans for a community housing project. One family shared how a simple, safe home would completely transform their children's future. Watching their gratitude reminded him that purpose had never left his life simply because one chapter remained unfinished. Love had shaped him, but disappointment did not have to define him. He understood that faith was not proven when every prayer received the answer he preferred. Faith became strongest when hope survived unanswered questions. As the seasons continued changing beneath warm daytime skies, Clara and Julian gradually rebuilt a friendship founded upon honesty rather than expectation. There was no dramatic reunion, no sudden miracle, and no easy explanation that erased every painful memory. Instead, they learned something far more valuable. Real love never demands possession. It seeks the highest good for another person, even when that requires personal sacrifice. Their families also changed. Those who had once pressured them began respecting the courage it took to follow deeply held convictions instead of public expectations. Friends who originally questioned their decision admitted they had witnessed remarkable maturity grow from profound disappointment. Clara's compassion became deeper because she now understood heartbreak personally. Julian's leadership became gentler because he had learned humility through loss. One afternoon they volunteered together once again at another community renovation project, much like the one where they had first met. Standing among smiling families receiving restored homes, both recognized how differently they viewed life. They no longer measured blessings only by fulfilled dreams. They measured them by transformed hearts, restored faith, and opportunities to love people generously despite personal pain. Clara quietly realized that God had never rejected her love. Instead, he had refined it. Julian understood that delayed understanding did not mean abandoned purpose. Some questions remained unanswered, but bitterness no longer occupied the spaces where hope had returned. They smiled sincerely, grateful not because everything had happened according to their plans, but because disappointment had shaped them into wiser, kinder, and more compassionate people. Before this story comes to an end, take a moment to leave a meaningful comment sharing one lesson you have learned about trusting God's timing, or tell us whether you have ever faced a moment when your heart wanted one thing but your faith led you somewhere else. Your story may encourage someone reading the comments today who desperately needs hope. The afternoon sun slowly stretched across the town as Clara walked toward the counseling center and Julian headed toward another family waiting for a better home. Their paths separated peacefully, yet both carried something far greater than certainty. They carried peace. They had discovered that even when love feels genuine, not every closed door is punishment. Sometimes it is preparation. Sometimes what feels like rejection is quiet protection. Sometimes the greatest miracle is not receiving everything we ask for but becoming the person we were always meant to be through the waiting. Their story became a reminder that hope does not disappear when plans change. Faith can still flourish after heartbreak. Love can remain beautiful without becoming possession. Forgiveness can free wounded hearts, and trust can grow stronger than disappointment. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. May this story remind you that even when life whispers, no, God's purpose can still be leading you toward a future filled with grace, healing, and a hope that never lets go.